Welcome, good afternoon, hola, benvinguts a totes y a tots. Welcome everybody and thanks for being here. I'm Irene de Mendoza, I'm the Artistic Director of Foto Colectania, and I'm going to do a very quick presentation of this event. Just to mention that this is part of our correspondence program. As you might all know, Wolfgang and Jana has been exchanging a series of letters under the general topic of face value, which is also connected to our current exhibition, Face Control, which is at Foto Colectania until the 20th of March. And today we have this opportunity of having them here in this event Zoom and having a conversation with them. Before starting, just a few small practical details. Please keep your mics off during the event, but feel free to use the chat during the whole event in case you want to ask anything or if you have any comments. You don't have to wait till the end. But of course, after maybe 40 minutes conversation, we will open the question and answers moment. So you will be able also to raise their hand and also send your questions either to Wolfgang or Jana. So welcome again. And I don't know, Wolfgang, if you want to start with a presentation.
Yes, welcome everybody, and Irene, thank you very, very much for the invitation, for your introductory words, and well, I think we are looking forward to this evening. Jana, hi. I think we had a fine exchange of letters in the last weeks, and in our letters we have already talked quite a lot about forms of masking the face, masking the body, and well, especially we talked about how masking has changed through digitalization as well as through the power of social media. And I think we both came to the conclusion that there are probably more forms and more functions of masks today than ever before in the long history of culture, and that both analog and digital forms of masking have been booming for some years now. On the one side, masking can be necessary to protect oneself from too much surveillance in the digital or in the analog public space. It can be necessary to not be detectable and recognizable everywhere or after years. But on the other side, masking can also be used to launch messages. Different sets of signs, signals, symbols can be used to declare one's support for something, or can be used to protest against something, as has been the case now for the past 2 weeks, for example, in a particularly strong, numerous way against the war in Ukraine. But masquerades can, as I think they always have, also serve to transcend one's own identity, to slip into other roles. And this is sometimes playful kind of masking, but it can have political implications too. By masking oneself, one perhaps wants to free oneself from cliched images to which one is otherwise subjected, to free oneself from a special gaze, for example. And well, in today's talk, we want to take up and to deepen some aspects of the topic and discuss them with all of you here. And we gave our talk a kind of unofficial title, and this title is the politicization of the face, which means that we want to focus on phenomena that show that the face and the way we deal with it, through different techniques of makeup and so on, has very often become an object of political statement and political movements. Jana, you yourself curated an exhibition last year in Munich with the title Resistant Faces, an exhibition that just has some similarities to the exhibition here in the Fondation, Face Control. And your title, Resistant Faces, already suggests that it's about protest, that the face becomes the site of political confrontations. And this would be perhaps a good starting point for our discussion, that perhaps you show us some examples of what this can mean, especially from an artistic point of view, because your exhibition took place in the Pinakothek der Moderne in Munich, in an art museum, and was an art exhibition. And this was the focus of it. I don't know, we have a presentation prepared with some examples. Shall I start it now and share the screen, or would you like to speak without presentation at first?
I mean, maybe I just also say a warm hello from my side. Hello, Wolfgang. Thank you again, Irene and Selber, for this nice invitation and organization of the correspondence that I really enjoyed a lot, also because it took me back to reflect a little bit on issues or topics I addressed during my PhD. That has been a while ago. And definitely also was a chance to think a little bit further on the exhibition that you just mentioned. And I think everyone of the participants today who didn't have the chance to read our correspondence will see, and might do that later, will see that we took a very wide ride from the carnival masks of Binge, from medieval phenomena up to over James Ensor's paintings, up to AI technology. So we really did a very broad, when it comes to art history, but also visual culture, a very long and wide ankle that we discussed. The show that you just mentioned, and also when it comes to the exhibition at Foto Colectania, was more specifically conceptualized around the topic of photography. And I think we both also tackled the question of photography, especially on social media, Instagram. You will talk about that a little bit later. Maybe, and then we can start with the presentation, motivated the research, or also the exhibition that I conducted for the Pinakothek der Moderne, was the observation that today the phenomena of the portrait and photography is very much defined around the question of digital surveillance, of faciality is also one of the words that is often used to discuss the relationship of portraiture that is not linked anymore to the idea of, authenticity was always a difficult task when we talk about portrait in photography, but we can see that there is a very strong tendency in contemporary photography, in digital, and the use of digital media to use digital tools for biometric facial recognition. For example, in states like the US, Russia, or China, that is used in public spaces. for observation purposes with cameras that are dismantled in public space. There has been also a lot of like critique from sociologists such as Zygmunt Bauman is talking about this question of liquid surveillance phenomena after 9/11 that allows the state to observe or go into areas of our private life that haven't been accessed before. And this also points to our use of digital tools in everyday life, such as Facebook or Google, these mega enterprises that are also developing facial databases, and they use these images, the portraits that we share a million times with each other every day, and give them for free as such. So many artists, contemporary artists, are reacting on this development that we can also call like non-collaborative portraits, photographs that are no longer in the history of photography. This is really a new phenomena, produced by a subject taking a picture with a subject in front of the camera, but we are confronted with images taken by machines. Also drone imagery is a good example here. This leads us to very questionable also relationship when it comes to the ethical correspondence. And of course also the question we discussed in our conversation, Wolfgang, was that these tools that are developed are often also, maybe we can go to the next foil, told to be neutral and easy, but of course the digital technologies are anything but neutral. Often they fail. For example, the racism that is also part of the development of this development process of algorithmic databases. For example, when it comes to identify people with dark skin color is a big issue. And from when we look at the history of photography, it is very important to say that this is also a very alarming historical reference that dates back to the 19th century, where the idea to classify people regarding criminal or categories such as skin color or ethnic background has a very worrisome history. So to show that and then we can maybe go back to the next image that I put together for the Pinakothek, was referring on these issues, on the question of like how the portrait is, or how artists use iconoclastic acts of masquerading, but also acts of subversing these controlling mechanisms, and how this is a question of resistance also. This was the title-giving idea, and develop different works that subvert or like discuss this new tendency. And I chose very shortly, because I already talked quite long, two examples, two works by Ullrich and the estate of Wolfgang and Jana, the former art duo. Also because they are now on display at the Foto Colectania, and they show very different approaches. I might start with Ullrich because her way of dealing with digital imagery is very interesting. She uses a lot of like found footage, and the images are then two videos also that are presented on this mechanism, on this like metal construction, and there are also stills, wallpapers, and then in the film she shows a very interesting and also important observation how the sexism and the racism of the, like, let's say, gaze on the female body has been continuing. We see images from old Hollywood movies until when we especially think about the concept of the masculine gaze by Laura Mulvey, like how women have always been depicted as a passive sexualized character, and how these cliches are continuing until today when it comes, for example, to the design of sex dolls or AI figures such as the AI computer Sophia. And when we go further in the presentation, here we see another image, and then maybe just only shortly to Wolfgang and Jana, Spirit is a Bone. This is a series of images that relates or goes back to a facial recognition technology that is used in Russia, FindFace. And the artist spent some time in Moscow and used or further developed this technology to took images of citizens in Moscow. So it's also interesting to, of course, link it to the current political question of state surveillance. and when we go, like maybe the next image, Wolfgang. Yeah, here we see these faces that are often like taken from 3 different angles from this like cameras. And when we go on the last one, we see it's a very like low resolution. We see these images are like the individuals are very hardly to recognize. They also are not, they don't know that they are photographed, so they never like really see inside the camera. And this is, I think, a very important tendency that or visualization of this question of non-collaborative photography. And the artists both refer also to August Sander in this work, to the history, and we go a little bit further, I think, on an art historical level. There are interesting like questions when it comes to the individual, the categorization, but of course they totally break with this question of like, first of all, the photographic contract between photographer and individual, but also there are no, there's no clothes, no hairs, no nothing is given. It's really this visualization of the algorithmic sheer information that is used in photography today. So this very short, and I mean, they also, which might be interesting to come back to our question of like mask, they refer to like 3D death mask in this case. I think I would like to ask some questions to you, Wolfgang, not continuing to talk. And one other issue you tackled, or a phenomena that you mentioned in our correspondence, that was more also focusing towards the phenomena of like social media, of Instagram, of also like how certain kind of influencers try to subvert narratives of certain let's call it beauty cliches. And you mentioned a politicized form of visual actionism that is entitled makeup brutalism, and that you are very interested in. And I would be interested in like how you could tell us about this question of using makeup as a form of activism on social media.
Yeah, thank you, Jana. I think there's a good link to the work of Eli Cortinias that you introduced to us. But another way of reacting on male gaze and on cliches against women. And yes, makeup brutalism is a type of makeup that was founded in recent years by the Hungarian makeup artist Eszter Magyar. Here a screenshot of this Instagram account, Makeup Brutalism. And as we can see here, Magyar deconstructs a conventional understanding of makeup. And I would say she addresses the accusation that makeup is always too much or too thickly applied by actually using far too much material in her photos, using makeup and all the cosmetics improperly, though that it, as you can see here, it clumps, and it, in other ways, it here, for example, it drips, it sticks together, and while the color gradients look unattractive, and any illusionism that is otherwise associated with the use of makeup is disturbed by this kind of using the materials. We can say makeup is reduced to its raw materiality, and therefore it's a good name, makeup brutalism. We can think of the famous movement in architecture after after the Second World War, especially brutalism in association with concrete at that time. And I think by doing so, Eszter Magyar also disturbs prevailing images of femininity. That's the main intention of her way of using all these cosmetics, by making makeup so raw, so brutally visible. She resists the expectation that women must always appear discreet and put their beauty at the service of others. And insofar, I think we can say that her makeup brutalism lends itself to a form of feminist rebellion. Insofar, it's a kind of activism. That was your question, makeup as activism. But I think there also we can see that aesthetic standards begin to shift a little bit. Perhaps with a movement as makeup brutalism, there happens something similar as in the whole body positivity movement. There's an attempt to break normative aesthetic standards. There's an attempt to develop more understanding for diversity and deviation. And well, there is an attempt to discover the attractive in the supposedly ugly too, I think. And sometimes it's very interesting, that's the last example of makeup brutalism here, that Eszter Magyar takes up insults that she herself experiences. Some people write these insults, for example, in the captions of her Instagram postings, and she takes them as a topic of another makeup, but turns them in the opposite. For example, here, some person insulted her and wrote, "You don't matter, give up." But she writes these words so that you can read them in another way. "You matter, don't give up." That means it turns the words in the opposite, and what was meant as an insult gets a gesture of self-empowerment. And I think that's an interesting turning point. Perhaps we have some other examples later in the evening where we can see that that's a very popular, very often used strategy in political activism today. On the one side, to show all the discrimination, but to turn it around in kinds of empowerment. And well, that's one strategy that we have here, and I think it's interesting to see how makeup becomes a kind of activism.
Yeah, thank you, Wolfgang. I find it very interesting because we talked mainly in our example also of like masking on the question of disappearing, of covering, of hiding as a like rebellious act against like state surveillance. And the example you just mentioned tackles much more as a question of making visible or becoming also. I think this is a good example of showing also certain kind of like harassment that is taking place on social media, and to visualize it, to use it against itself, which is a strategy that we didn't discuss before. Another question that came to my mind when we talk about this use of makeup as a brutalism. I mean, brutalism also comes as a term from architecture. It's usually seen as like ugly, it's brutal. So we can also speak about like an anti-aesthetics. And there are also other artists that play with this like anti-aesthetics. Using the ideas, the aesthetics of the digital against itself. And I especially like in our conversation you mentioned Anna Uddenberg, and maybe you misunderstood that I don't like her work, but maybe you can talk a little bit about other artists that from the contemporary art fields use this like promises or pitfalls of digital culture in their sculptural work beyond Instagram. Yeah.
Yes, we will see if I misunderstood you or not. However, well, I think there are a number of so-called post-internet artists who work, I would say, less with the means of deconstruction and more with a form of, I would call it hyper-affirmation. And in this way, they make well, certain aesthetic standards or problematic ideals clearer. But also, I think they profit from the fascination that many feel towards these ideals, these aesthetic ideals. And Anna Uddenberg's work is a good example for that. Here one of her installations or sculptures. Her work is dedicated, I'd say, to the clean aesthetics of the world of influencers. And she stages women who turn themselves into objects where the line between body and commodity can no longer be clearly drawn. Here another example of her work. And as you can see, everything here is highly designed, is perfected, but also very artificial, very cold. Another kind of brutality we have here than in makeup brutalism. And well, an operated and made up masked body is here no different from products such as clothes or shoes. It's not different. There's no difference to the furniture, to the accessories of the rooms in which this figure moves. And I think this similarity between body and commodities, this becomes very impressively clear in Anna Uddenberg's work. And well, as you said, I had the impression that you are more critical of her and her work, of the post-internet art in general. But perhaps I really did not understand you right. Therefore, it would be a good point if you can briefly outline your position. I hope this will not lead too far away from the actual topic, but some sentences perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, not at all specifically about her work, but I think what I found interesting, just to like a short recap, like post-internet art was like movement that culminated in a Berlin Biennale 2016, created by the artist collective This, and has been often described as art that is showing art that is made for its own installation shots or installation shots that are presented as art. I think this is somehow this like a summary. And of course, like all these like terms or turns, they always fail because there were like many artists, also like Hito Steyer, for example, or when it comes to this anti-aesthetics, Ryan Trecartin, that whose work is also really playing with mirroring this like excess of self-exposure, you can say, in the internet, that I find quite striking. But for me, I have to say that on a curatorial level, many positions exhibited were, but I'm a huge also fan is a difficult word, but as many, of course, I'm following Hito Steyer's work, and I think she's one of the most important like positions when it's coming, but also from essay movie transferring the idea of the discourse of also writing extensively on questions such as a poor image, and also questioning in the displays, for example, the work, the perception, like bringing back the body also. And these are positions that interest me, I have to say, from a curatorial point of view. So what is happening when the emptied non-collaborative portrait is being transferred from the internet into the physical, like experiential, like space of the museum? What also on a material level is happening? What kind of like experiments are happening when artists? This was very important for the show at Pinakothek. I also exhibited artists who would do ceramics, for example, or wall paintings, use different materiality to reflect on digital images. So I think in this little like breaks and errors, for me, lies an interesting point. This was a little bit more my point of critique.
Well, no, understand, and I think we agree widely. I remember that I wrote a critique of this Biennale in Berlin 2016, where I just criticized that many of the works that were exhibited there cannot profit when the aesthetics comes from the internet in the material room, in the real life, that there it's quite disillusionating, and there was Anna Udenberg an exception for me of this Berlin Biennale, but in the wide range I can agree with you in this point. Well, and in our correspondence we spoke about some positions that never leave the internet, that remain in the virtual world. We spoke about masks without bodies, figures that are invented as digital figures only, and there you have had some very interesting critique too in your second letter, because yes, you suppose that it's these figures are very normative, perhaps even restrictive, oppressive in their effects, and well, perhaps you can elaborate on your criticism a little further. El Michela is, for example, the most prominent of these only virtual figures, an influencer with some million followers, and she does not really exist. She's a product of a company with good IT specialists, and but very prominent, more prominent than the most influencers in real life. But what is the consequence of such figures? And if you look at them, how are they designed? And is this a great return of the male gaze?
Exactly. And this was exactly, I think, my main point of critique. I mean, definitely when we look back into the invention of the internet, or also of this important concept of the cyborg, the first generation of internet artists always referred to Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto that was written as a kind of utopic and very feminist idea that the digital space could lead towards to free us from categorizations such as race, class, and gender. But what we see, especially in this in many of the AI designed, or also in this influencer examples that you brought up, is that especially the cliches or the bodies that are developed are not at all free of these hierarchies. And so I'm often a little bit bored with the flatness or generalizing aesthetics, to say. And I already mentioned, for example, the humanoid robot like Sophia. So why is IA needs to be, I mean, when we also see how Sophia goes into American talk shows, would even meet like Merkel, why does she need to have red lipstick and wear, it is, we see that most of these technologies are still designed by white men. And there's still this question to me, how we could use, of course, this aesthetics in a different way. And there's still a lot of work to do. And of course, I don't want to generalize. I don't want to be too negative. There are also certainly wonderful examples from Black queer, intersectional movements that use Instagram, for example, or Bitcoin NFT technology, TikTok to speak up, but the dominant narratives are still very much linked towards commercial ends, and this is what sells is often very conservative, and I think this is my main concern that I had to this perfect bodies, this that is linked to the increase of likes. That was more or less the point.
Yes.
But
I can only agree with you here. And well, you speak of minorities and queer people and Black people and so on, and they are widely underrepresented by now. If you have a look at the cosmos of these virtual figures, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I'm looking at the time. I don't know if we're running out of time, but I noted the last question to you, and then maybe we can also open this up to the audience. I'm also wondering, because we always see, but it's nice, I don't like looking at my own face, but I always see your face. I don't know if it's also for the audience in this case. So yeah, we discussed in our correspondence, but also today, mainly the politicization of the face as a reaction on a regime of transparency and control in the age of the digital. And I was wondering, what other forms of protest do you find important, especially when thinking of forms of hiding, disappearing, going offline? I think there were interesting memes also right now, commenting on the immediacy of the war in Ukraine, how we consume, we react, we also give a lot of misinformation. We are silenced with all this like violence. So how can we, or what kind of like reacts more thoughtfully to this, like to the current events and to the immediate, to the regime of immediacy that we are confronted with?
Well, I think there are many ways of reacting, and memes would be a wonderful field for examples, but perhaps not the best example for our discussion today. And therefore, I would like to bring some other examples from the field of makeup art here. I think we can observe that masking, staging of the face are especially important for people from minorities, and even more so when they are devalued, when they are shamed because of physical characteristics such as skin color, for example. And after I made the observation that makeup art became one of the most important means of political demonstration culture on social media after the murder of George Floyd in 2020, when the Black Lives Matters movement got increased attention. And I can show you one or two examples. Here we have, for example, that's an Instagram account from Wendy Azumadu, a Black woman living in London, which originates in Ghana. She is makeup artist. For example, Tate Modern in London made some cooperations with her. And she's a star on TikTok, and she has a lot of followers on Instagram. And this is a still of her makeup tutorial video from her. And we see and here are some other stills, and we see that she paints her face gesturally in strong hues, not always, that's interesting or important, taking physiognomic features into account. And her makeup is partly analog and partly digital. And the main impression, I think, is more that we have here a kind of overpainting than a contouring of the face. And insofar we have again, as with makeup brutalism, we have an iconoclastic dimension here of makeup. But equally, it provides a glow. It provides an own kind of beauty, I would say. And so far, we have the same ambivalence or dialectics as we had it before. We can say that the violence, that all the aggression with which Black people, their bodies, their faces are often spoken about, is made visible. But at the same time, it's turned around because, well, by painting the own face with so much color, so much energy, Azumadu signals power, strength, and expressiveness. And insofar we can say that the same makeup testifies to oppression and devaluation, and on the other side, it is a testify of the pride, of the self-empowerment of the artist. And this is very interesting, I think, and a very important move that we can observe here. Perhaps before we start our discussion, a last example, a little bit another kind of aesthetics, but I think the same kind of move once again. we remain in the area of Black Lives Matters movement. This is people of color from Senegal who lives in France, her account. And well, we see she marked here one side of her face around the eye, so that the outline of the continent of Africa can be seen. And the shape of the continent appears here on the first view as a stigma, I would say, or as a wound, or as it would be burned. It's an injury, it's a disfigurement of the face, we can say. And Shalady looks a little bit sad, or at least quite serious, and this confirms this impression, I would say, of disfigurement. However, if we look a little bit longer at this photography, then I think the perception changes a little bit. In this irregularity, the form also possesses a peculiar beauty, I would say. And one follows the outline, though with hardly less pleasure than the line of beauty and grace. And we see that the lips are glossed, and we see that the lady wears a colorful neck ring. And all this reinforces the impression that the woman explicitly wants to present herself as beautiful and wants to present her face with pride and self-confidence. And so far we have again the same turn. All the discrimination is part of the makeup, but it is turned around and gets a document of self-empowerment. And well, that's another example. I could show some more, but perhaps we have enough stuff until now that we can open the discussion for our public. Perhaps I finish the presentation, because in this mood I cannot see if we have comments in the chat. Or
Yes.
Then I will stop this. Yes, fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if, shall we open the discussion? Are there discussions already, questions already?
Or otherwise the people can start their, open their microphones, or start their videos. We can hear and see them, and then, well, you can write or you can speak as it's better for you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if people are shy. If they want to use the chat, maybe we can read the questions.
But are there already questions in the chat?
I cannot
not
see.
yet.
Not yet, okay.
There are no questions. So maybe you can continue with some of the ideas that I'm sure that you have not talked and discussed yet.
Well, I have 2 more examples on the same topic. Makeup that is a kind of activism. One example where we can see the intersectional experience from a lady who is Black and is queer, for example. This I could show and discuss with you. Perhaps then I would share the screen once again. Or well, I can.
But I mean, maybe I have a question for you, Wolfgang. So I think it became very clear that also in our correspondence, like you focused much more on social media,
Yes.
and I am much more interested in also this question of like, taking visual action activism towards public space. I, for example, mentioned Zach Blass, who develops this like facialized, weaponized masks that he would wear in public space to visualize on the one hand like racialized, like surveillance questions, but also to become invisible. And I'm wondering also what interests you so much. Where do you see the advantages and disadvantages of using social media and Instagram as a tool compared to other forms of course?
Yes. I think the social media in general and Instagram especially is a good medium for people to connect with each other. And especially, for example, after the murder of George Floyd, it was very interesting to see how many individuals in the makeup scene began to connect themselves, and they established some hashtags that didn't exist before. For example, avant-garde black was one of these hashtags. And they realized how many they are, how many people who were disconnected before tried quite similar ways of using makeup for activistic issues. And they became a real movement, and this changed something. And I think this would not have been possible without the infrastructures of social media. That you have hashtags, that you can follow, that you can comment postings of others. And that's an important point. On the other side, it's no question that there are many problematic sides. All the discussions about algorithms, for example, that are very important and very there take place a lot of things that are not transparent enough, that are too commercial, and all the arguments against social media are quite correct and quite important. But well, as I told, on the other side, I think it's a good way to organize yourself, and especially all strategies of empowerment are more successful when they take place in social media and use the possibilities of networking. This would, and this is a great point of interest for me in general. Well, how these possibilities of networking change aesthetic strategies, change aesthetic iconographies, and so on. And in a lot of milieus and scenes, you can see that. And well, we just now spoke about masquerades and about makeup.
Yeah, I think that Rosa has a question. If you want to put your micro.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both so much for this super inspiring conversation. And I've also been really enjoying the correspondence that was posted online. Also, I have COVID, so apologies for my voice. So I had a question about sort of the political potential of moments of camouflage and masking and artistic practices such as like Blass, that very much indeed hide the face from surveillance as an act of resistance. I'm very interested in these kind of acts of resistance, and especially also when they happen in art. But then, well, you have this feminist scholar, Toni Monahan, who has very much argued against the political potential of that, and very much said, well, these kind of individual acts puts the focus on the individual subject, and sort of in a very playful way approach resistance as a possibility, whilst for many it actually is not. And I was just very interested to hear from your perspectives how, you look at that critique, or how you, would respond to it. Thank you.
But thank you, Rose. I find it a very important comment. Can you explain a little bit more the argument? Is it against or for visibility that you just mentioned? So,
yes, so
yeah,
I'm not saying I agree with it.
Okay, yeah.
But it's an argument that's constantly or that I see keep on coming back in this text by Monahan, which is quite often quoted. So that's why I would be interested to hear your vision on it. So what Monahan, I think, is arguing is that these artists often are also themselves in a rather privileged position, and then sort of claim a right for invisibility or anonymity as an artistic speculative exploration, perhaps even. And yeah, I wonder, or sort of Toni Monahan argues that sort of there's a very limited political potential to that, because not everybody has the possibility to really claim, the right to privacy, because maybe they don't even are in that situation. So do you see where I'm going? Or
Yes, absolutely. Now it's much clearer to me. Maybe shall I start and then you intervene, Wolfgang? I agree, and I think this would be an interesting. I mean, I find it an interesting argument, especially when it comes to the examples, Wolfgang, you just used. When it comes to social media and from the perspective of the non-privileged to use their own body to claim it for visibility. On the other hand, I mean, of course, there's also a strong history of when it comes to the way of how feminism used their own body. And since the early beginnings, when we look at photography or video art, nakedness, like picturing yourself, returning the gaze was always a strong strategy. So from a feminist point of view, I would agree. But I wouldn't use it as an argument maybe against disappearing. There is also this famous video by Hito Steyerl, and I think it's the question of how not to be seen. I think it's a very and it's a nice video tutorial of how to disappear, how to become invisible in an age of surveillance. And I think also she tackles some questions of how invisibility can be seen also as a point of and also I would say Zach Blaise is a good example for someone who is speaking also from a not privileged point of view, as a queer, of course white, but still queer man who is using this or I find it in the complexity of visualizing and showing how algorithmic surveillance functions, and also how it aims against people, Black people, for example, Asian women and so on, is also an argument of protests. So I wouldn't see these two movements against each other. I think both are different strategies, and also when it comes to protests in public space, which are maybe not, but I think when we think about Black Lives Matter, also especially the protests, the physical protests in public space were so impressive during the pandemic, and we're moving like a lot more also when it comes to political decision making, and also the question of monuments, of destroying old statues of colonial movement, which is a very big topic in the question of like for the decolonizing movements. This act of like making invisible is a very strong argument from these groups. So yeah, I don't know what you have to say, Wolfgang.
Not much more, you say.
Yeah.
Very good. And perhaps one small point only. I think that for many people who are underprivileged, the first issue now is to get visible, and to get visible, especially in a self-determined way, because when they got visible in the past, they had not the possibility to control the ways how to get visible. And I think this is a great opportunity of the social media and of digitalization in general, that many people who had never the chance to get visible have this chance first time. And therefore it may seem that it's only a discourse of privilege to disappear again, but I think that's the necessary other side. If you have the possibility to get visible, then you can decide to when and why you don't want to get visible. But then this has another impact than in cases where you aren't visible at all. And but I would agree with Jana. It makes no sense to oppose these two strategies. They are just they have other moments in a history where they are important, but they don't exclude each other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks so much. I really agree, I must say, because I was always a bit annoyed by this argument. So thanks so much for your responses.
Thank you for your question and comment.
Are there more questions? At least one more.
Well, then I can add something. Maybe it's not a question; it's more like an idea. Than while having the exhibition Face Control at Colectania these days, many people are getting like a bit of conscious of this control that we are all receiving. And what I see is that obviously people are getting conscious of this control and this access to our privacy and intimacy. But I'm not so sure. For example, one person told me that maybe the future generations, when they see 2022, how open we are and so super exposed to everything, maybe they will be a bit like surprised, that we are so open and not concerned of how we are being exposed. Any ideas on how to make people more conscious on that? Or I don't know. I think that people are starting to be conscious, but maybe not enough. For example, this exhibition has been like a small way of giving this awareness.
Well, I think the technical developments will give us some examples that will shock a lot of people. For example, if the techniques of deepfake are more developed than now, then many people will see what is the danger of if you give too much data of yourself in the internet, in the social media, how this can be misused. And then we will, I'm quite sure, then we will will become much more sensitive in this point. And perhaps some laws will be changed because of that. All the laws of personality rights, I can imagine they will be broadened, and insofar I think you are right that perhaps in 10 years we will look a little bit upset back to 22 now, to 2022, to this year.
Yeah, I mean, I find it from a media historical point of view a very important question, because I always said I don't want to be too conservative. We know that when the train was developed, people were afraid to go into the train. When the radio was there, when the television was developed, and there's at the moment a book by Chuck Klosterman, the 90s, that discusses a lot this hype around the 90s and like how reality TV entered our living rooms. And I think we can all like remember this like very well, this negativity of like self-exposure and of was already discussed in that time. But when we think about, when I only look into my life from like how quickly the development from my teenage ages without internet to now, and the possibilities of also dealing with information have changed in such a short time. I think it's definitely very worrisome also when we look into like how also the influence, when we look into the Trump phenomenon of Trump, of like post-truths, of also how this media is used and owned by some very few like concerns that also like own Twitter or are able, have the right to give, to show content or not show content. I think it's very, on the one hand, as you said, important to think about laws, and we see that state laws and nation states are always behind because the concerns that are owning the information or creating the technologies are beyond state organizations. And on the other hand, I think it's very important just to educate and start very, very early. I mean, I know it, I see it. I'm also raising a child, and the exposure of all this misinformation, of also being abused is so high. It's something that I didn't experience when I was young. So schools really need to start very, very early to think about like the right on the own image, like how not to use, how to block certain information, but also to use it to turn it into something good. I mean, when we look at how the mobilization that is possible, we talked about Black Lives Matter, we talked about the Ukrainian war very shortly, but also about like how we can also use this technology to connect, to help. There are also, of course, positive ways, but and both are much more like the potential is so high that we just have to really think and use it very consciously in both ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there any other questions in the chat? No. So
not one last.
And I mean, I have another, but I already asked a question.
Oh, I see.
So
also,
I see someone else has a question.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Hannah.
I think you have to.
Thank you very much for this. Yeah, thank you very much for the very interesting conversation. And I have a question regarding maybe the terminology of make-up. Actually, I'm not very sure where it actually comes from, who used the term the first time, because if you make up a story, it's not exactly something very positive. So I'm a little bit like asking after this kind of how we use makeup as protest, or as like to kind of multiply our identity and to have a very playful, or also like resistant approach to makeup. But then when we really look at the word, it's, as I said, if you make up a story, it's probably not, like, it's very far away from truth, kind of, to make up something. And this relates a little bit back to this question. Maybe I have overheard it or something, but there is a dimension of like this use of war paint to paint your face for the war. And I know from also very personal experience that many, especially women, really like understand their paint in their eyes or in their face as like a kind of a war paint, and not so much as a kind of resistance or protest or something. So I was wondering if you could probably say something about this, like Spannungsfeld, as we would say in German, like
Yes.
this kind of tensions that we have here.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a broad field that you open with your question. And well, I'm no expert in the history of etymology of makeup, but something like makeup artists is a genre that we have at least about 60, 80 years. And if we go back in history, then we see very similar phenomena in other societies and other centuries, where staging the own face was a very prominent kind of art or profession. And I think social media have the effect that they put makeup strategies in a prominent position. Makeup artists were not very prominent 20, 30 years ago. They were a kind of on the outer side of recognition, but this has changed. And there are many different movements, and I just talked about one or two of these movements today. And we often have this ambivalence that you mentioned too, that makeup is not truth. Yes, it's a kind of alienation. It's a kind of camouflage. It's a kind of frauding others. But on the other side, it's a way to make more explicit what you stand for, what you confess, what's your convictions, and you have in each example, I think you have to interpret what's the main intention of the makeup, and what's another aspect that may play a role too, and what's not so important in this case. And this makes this kind of art very interesting and very I think some examples that I showed you, I think we can interpret them quite different than I did it. They are as ambiguous, as semantical rich as traditional artworks, and insofar it's for me no problem to speak of makeup art here. However, it's a very popular kind of art. It's a kind of pop culture that we have here, not high culture. That I think that's clear. Even if there may be some similarities between kinds of performance art of the last 30, 40 years and these strategies of makeup art I spoke about. But primarily it's a very different thing. These were some, I don't know if that's enough for your question, but
yeah,
perhaps.
Thank you very much. And I was, yeah, I mean, I was probably also a little bit interested in this like relationship to war paint. not in the sense of being like resistant or to protest, but as like this origin, or where these like kind of different ways how to paint your eyes or how to paint your face, how you apply different strategies. And I think there's also a very interesting point to this, that makeup artists evolved with popular culture or like with social media, that this is like maybe a good medium for the digital age to make up in the literal sense of
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, but I think maybe you have, as you just said, Hannah, an own interpretation in mind. So maybe you can also like exactly like tell a little bit more about that. But I thought more about this like makeup to invent, you know, like also maquillage en français, so to invent a new identity. So to really like link it more to the question of masquerade, of like of covering, of hiding, of taking over, or playing with different like forms of identity. So I would rather read it in this like really like direction of the mask as the face. And as a wall paint, I don't know, but it's interesting also that you mentioned like war, the covering, or the like the question of mimicry, of hiding, would then be again, I think, it's a different way of masquerading. Then we are again in the complex of disappearing, you know, of like, and I mean, at least when I think about the classic war makeup, that is would be like part of the hide, like blind in nature to become invisible. But I don't know what you have in mind. I had the feeling that you were also talking a little bit about the feminist statement when it comes, or not.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't have, like, it was just more
Okay.
a comment. And I think I also totally agree with you. And I'm wondering if like the digital space and this like kind of that you can apply more identities or multiply your identities, that this is maybe connected to this like kind of rise of makeup artists. I think that there is probably this, it's a genre that is probably very much or connected with the medium of the digital or of social media. This is how I would totally agree with you, but I think it's like maybe even more interlinked.
Definitely. I mean, I would say for me, it's a really new phenomenon. I was never so like interested in it as Wolfgang, and I just started during our correspondence also to discover like this field more. But I found very interesting that like some of the most successful makeup artists also in Asia, for example, are often men. Like it's a lot of a very queer genre also. So, and it's this is something that I also find interesting for this question of like gender fluidity. That is, of course, a phenomena of our time. It's also very important. We
Drag
didn't address
queens are very important.
Drag queens, definitely the whole like drag queen like culture. And that there we also have another like also subcultural movement that is taking over, and this is something definitely to look into. And yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
No further question or?
Okay. So thank you very much. I think it was a super inspiring conversation and also a complementary talk, very important for your letters, that I'm sure that you only had the space for 4. I'm sure that you could continue with many other topics. So thank you again for participating in this new edition of Correspondence, and hope to see you soon in Barcelona or whatever.
Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to discuss, to express some thoughts. It was a very special and fine thing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you again. It was really a pleasure. We have a lot food for thought, and now hopefully real food.
Yes.
And yeah, thank you again. It was really like, as you said, Wolfgang, we had where we could have continued. I mean, I first thought 1,500 words it's a lot, and then I always was like beyond so easily and so quickly. So let's see, maybe it leads somewhere else, this conversation.
You will see.
Let's see. Okay.
Fine.
So
Have
thank
a nice
you.
evening.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Evening.
Good
Bye bye
evening.
everyone.
Gracias.
Bye.
Gracias.
Gracias.